When we spoke at the start of the year, I said it was way too close to November to switch anybody out. Turns out that I was wrong.
Beginner's luck.
You said, what are the odds that Joe Biden has a debilitating event between now and November, including death? So he runs a 1 in 20 chance of dying in any given year or above, that I don't think you know whether he's even going to make it to November. Debilitating event could have been a debilitating public event.
I purposely left it vague, and I didn't say the other part of it, which I now feel comfortable saying, which is I don't know whether Donald Trump will be allowed to become president.
What do you mean by that?
I think that there's a remarkable story, and we're in a funny game, which is, are we allowed to say what that story is? Because to say it, to analyze it, to name it, is to bring it into view. I think we don't understand why the censorship is behaving the way it is. We don't understand why it's in the shadows. We don't understand why our news is acting in a bizarre fashion. So let's just set the stage, given that that was in February. There is something that I think Mike Benz has just referred to as the rules-based international order. It's an interlocking series of agreements, tacit understandings, explicit understandings, clandestine understandings about how the most important structures keep the world free of war and keep markets open. And there has been a system in place, whether understood explicitly or behind the scenes or implicitly, that says that the purpose of the two American parties is to prune the field of populist candidates so that whatever two candidates exist in a face-off are both acceptable to that world order. So what you're trying to do from the point of view, let's take it from the point of view of, let's say, the State Department, the intelligence community, the Defense Department, and major corporations that have to do with international issues, from arms trade to, food. They have a series of agreements that are fragile and could be overturned if a president entered the Oval Office who didn't agree with them, and the mood of the country was, why do we pay taxes into these structures? Why are we hamstrung? Why aren't we a free people? So what the two parties would do is that they would run primaries. You'd have populist candidates, and you'd pre-commit the populist candidates to support the candidates who won the primaries. As long as that took place and you had two candidates that were both acceptable to the international order, that is, that they aren't going to rethink NAFTA or NATO or what have you, we called that democracy. And so democracy was the illusion of choice, what's called magician's choice, where the choice is not actually, pick a card, any card, but somehow the magician makes sure that the card that you pick is the one that he knows. In that situation, you have magician's choice in the primaries, and then you'd have the duopoly field, two candidates, either of which was acceptable, and you could actually afford to hold an election. And the populace would vote, and that way the international order wasn't put at risk every 4 years, because you can't have alliances that are subject to the whim of the people in plebiscites. So under that structure, everything was going fine until 2016. And then the first candidate ever to not hold any position in the military nor position in government in the history of the Republic to enter the Oval Office, Donald Trump, broke through the primary structure. So then there was a full court press. Okay, we only have one candidate that's acceptable to the international order. Donald Trump will be under constant pressure that he's a loser, he's a wild man, he's an idiot, and he's under the control of the Russians. And then he was going to be a 20-1 underdog. And then he wins. And there was no precedent for this. They learned their lesson. You cannot afford to have candidates who are not acceptable to the international order and continue to have these alliances. This is an unsolved problem. So I don't have a particular dog in this fight. I, one, believe in democracy. I also believe in international agreements. And it is the job of the State Department, the intelligence community, and the Defense Department to bring this problem in front of the American people and say, we have a problem. You don't know everything that's going on. And if you start voting in populist candidates, you're going to end up knocking out load-bearing walls that you don't understand.
But Trump was in office for 4 years. Did he turn the entire table upside down?
He risked doing that.
Say more.
You remember that there was this uncomfortable accommodation given to the Central Intelligence Agency at the beginning of his actual term. There was a question about, was he going to question I have a very different point of view than most of my friends who are also, at least nominally Democrats, which is it was a very immoral thing that was done to him. He was asked the question, will you pre-commit that you will accept the results of an election? Now, if you were going to rig an election, you would ask somebody that to begin with, and that's part of the game. And he says, well, we'll see. So you have this very strange thing going on where democracy is the greatest threat to democracy. Now, how can that be? It's two different concepts of democracy. One concept of democracy is the will of the people. You hold plebiscites. And even if you do it with an electoral college or political parties, the idea is that the people are elected, by and of and for the people. The other idea of democracy is that democracy is about institutions that sprang from democracy once upon a time, and that those institutions have to be kept strong. Those are two completely different concepts that are overloaded to the same word. Under that circumstance, we have a paradox, which is how do we keep the electorate from overturning the type A democracy from overturning the type B democracy? And that's the unsolved problem that they will not bring in front of the people. So what you have is a situation in which I believe that there are many people in Washington, D.C. who think that Donald Trump cannot become president because he can now go for broke. He's also not going to try to run for re-election. He's relatively unconstrained. He's wealthy. He's learned how to play a lot of these games.
And maybe got a little bit of an axe to grind as well after the last 6 years.
No kidding. And he's a wild card. There are three people who are doing amazing versions of the drunken boxing game. Kanye, who's probably the first one to really fail, Elon, and Donald Trump. And all three of them tried to do something where you couldn't pin them down. You couldn't figure out what they were going to do next. And that's what the order keeps trying to do. Will you commit to this? Will you say this? Will you mouth these words? And none of these people would play the game. I find this all. You ever see Emmanuel Augustus, this boxer who actually, I think Floyd Mayweather said it was his toughest opponent because he wouldn't fight in a style that anyone could recognize. Probably the most
unpredictable.
And the most entertaining boxer I've ever seen in my life. I mean, just check out any highlight reel and you won't even believe this is real. It doesn't seem possible. So that's what Donald Trump is. He's a guy who's got formulas that confuse people like Sam Harris. Sam and I have been debating this for years. I think that Trump is an incredibly intelligent man and that there's incredible method in his tweets of old. You could put them into a data set and you say that there are 5 or 6 different types of tweets and that the left falls for every one of them every time. So in this situation, you have a question. How is it that Donald Trump and RFK Jr. cannot possibly reach the Oval Office and we have to have a candidate who is pre-subscribed to perpetuating these institutions, these agreements, and these orders? And there's only 1 out of 3 who has that character, and that person has not won a primary. Right now, we have no idea who's running the United States of America. I just came here in a Tesla, and I did not steer once. And I would say America is in full self-driving mode, and we don't know what the AI is that's running the Oval Office. And that's really bizarre, given that we have something like 6 minutes to make a decision about nuclear launches. We have no idea what the United States government in the executive branch actually is. But it can't be Joe Biden.
Every time it seems that an election has happened over the last decade or so, it's always been, this one is different. This is the most important. This is the most important. Is there something different about the one that we're about to go into? How should we think about this election?
As World War II unraveling, the order that has produced the illusion of peace for this length of time. Imagine that you were, let's say in the 2000s, that you had this thing called the Great Moderation. And there was a story that we had finally banished volatility from the markets. None of that was true. What you were doing was you were going farther and farther into a regime without understanding that sooner or later the Jenga tower has to collapse. The order that was put in place at the end of World War II, none of its architects are still alive. Very few pieces of information were passed down about what it actually is or how it functions because it's secret. And I think what you can say is that we are now living on the fumes built from that victory. That is what is unraveling. You're about to head towards a multipolar world where the game theory in a dyadic game of two players doesn't look remotely like the game theory in a 5 or 10 player game. So Kamala is essentially the youngest boomer possible, and she's tied to the last silent generation president we'll ever have, which was a bizarre thing to begin with. And she's pre-committed to trying to continue that order in the guise of a alternatively woke, Wall Street friendly, Indian black, folksy. I don't even know what she is. To quote the great Chris Williamson, she's a meme of a meme of a meme. That was from our last talk. And I would say this is probably the most insane election we've ever seen by a comfortable margin. I would say that there's no one in second place. I can't think of another election that is even close to this bizarre, including the attempted assassination on Donald Trump.
Yeah, there's so many things all coalescing at the same time, from what's happening with the media to AI to discontent to fake news and cheap fakes and constructed.
Fake news was a fake story. If you look at the Google Trends, fake news was a tiny story during the 2016 cycle that blew up immediately afterwards. It was the placeholder as the intelligence community or the blob figured out what it was going to do next to try to take control of the international order. You have to realize that that's the first real surprise in presidential history where they lost control of the process.
Well, I've got a surprise for you. I told you not to watch this before we get to do this.
I actually listened.
Did you?
Well, it's weird.
I told you not to do it.
I know. It's like pouring sugar on a picnic to keep ants away.
Okay. So for the people who haven't seen it, we'll just do a quick recap.
MSNBC was exposed today for yet another set of lies. They deceptively edited together this video of different Joe Rogan comments to make it appear that he was singing the praises of Kamala Harris.
She's going to win.
No, she's not.
She can win. She is a strong woman. She is a person who served overseas twice. She in a medical unit. She was a congresswoman for 8 years.
Yeah.
She is a person of color. She's everything you want. She's going to win.
No, she's not.
She can win. They just want no Trump, no matter what.
What do you make of that? That's the most brazen cutting together of something that millions of people have seen.
They don't really, whatever it is not really trying to fool you. It's trying to instruct you. You're allowed to see the truth. They can make it difficult to find the truth, but it's hard to shut up Joe Rogan. They've settled for something else, which is, think about MSNBC and CNN, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, Reuters, AP, etc., as a set of instructions for how to keep your job. You're allowed to disagree. We'll set the boundaries of the disagreement. We'll set the topics of the disagreement. You may not even watch any of these things, but we'll make sure that it filters through to the people that you are watching so that they're outraged. And you're given a choice. You can choose to understand whatever you want, and you can choose to say whatever you want. But if you say what you understand to be true, you can know what the consequences are. You may lose your marriage. You may lose your job. You may lose your friends. And so, in essence, we all know that if you question the war in Ukraine, or if you say, look, I detest Donald Trump, but I'm voting.
And retroactive continuity.
Retcon.
Yeah. But I didn't know what retroactive continuity, I didn't know that that's what retconning, I just knew it as retcon. So retroactive continuity is a literary device in which facts in the world of a fictional work that have been established through the narrative itself are adjusted, ignored, supplemented, or contradicted by subsequently published work that recontextualizes or breaks continuity with the former. So the question is what we're seeing just the Star Wars cinematic universe equivalent?
Yeah, this is Sherlock Holmes and Professor Moriarty, where
falls off a ledge,
and yet here he is again.
It's every episode of South Park when Kenny's died.
So it's very important to understand the back of house in everything that you're doing. So, when you go to a hotel, there's an entirely secondary structure of floors, elevators, entrances, cafes that are necessary to support the front of house, which is the illusion of the hotel that you're staying in. And the same thing is true for screenwriting and the creative arts. I think everyone should, for example, read Save the Cat. It's a book on screenwriting that points out that films aren't broken into scenes so much as they're broken into beats. There are about 40 beats in a film, and the beats have names. And so if you read this book, one is called The Bad Guys Close In, and another beat is called All Hope is Lost. And these are mainstays, and you're programmed client side at a subliminal level to be able to follow a film based on the idea that your brain is already tooled to absorb this stuff. There's a concept called spackle in Hollywood, where it costs a couple of lines to make something that makes no sense make sense. I think it's referenced in Thank You for Smoking, where they're smoking in space and there's an issue with product placement. How does it make sense to have cigarette smoking in space after sex and whatever? Oh, it'll cost us 2 lines of spackle. And so every once in a while, the craft pokes through. And so this is retcon is a back of house concept. And the issue, again, really comes back to professional wrestling. The smark is a smart mark, a person who is being duped and agrees to be duped, but has a metacognitive perch from which to watch his or her own deception. So you're both a consumer of the story. Like when you go to a movie, it's fictional. You don't sit there saying, this is such BS. The old thing I used to say is you don't scream, don't you understand? It's just photons projected on a wall. We are complicit in our own deception. Otherwise, we'll never be seduced. And there's nothing more wonderful than a seduction to which we are willing and eager. But this is an unwanted seduction. This is coercive. This is based on a lot of carrot being taken away, and more or less all of what you have is stick.
It's strange in a world where everything that everybody does and says on the internet is permanently recorded on some version of a blockchain that's kept in screenshots, even if it then gets deleted from Twitter. It just seems odd to me that there is so much retconning of this. You spoke about managed reality last time. A good example, a nice simple example of this is Kamala Harris was never called the border czar. Like they went back and changed the old articles from 3 years ago.
Here's my question. When did you wake up to this? Because in my situation, Peter Thiel, who I used to work for, said this to me. He's like, Eric, how did you get there earlier? And I said, well, I was in the university system. And academics has a faster glide path into the ground than everything else. You could see it there in the 1980s.
I don't know. I think it has taken a little bit of time. Maybe moving to America, seeing these things closer up has been part of it. I have a strong non-conspiratorial disposition, so I will always attribute to incompetence or negligence or fear of losing your job, cowardice.
You're running the packet.
So-
There's the lefty enervation packet, and it's something that you're sort of obligated to run if you're going to be a member in good standing of the American left. So one part of it would say that correlation does not imply causation. Data is not the plural of anecdote. Never explain by malice what can be understood through incompetence. There's a large sequence of things that you're expected to say if you want the pat on the back from your colleagues. A random walk down Wall Street. Nobody can beat the market. You know that there are rich people 3 doors down who got that way from investing, but they're simply lucky idiots. All of these things you're expected to run if you're part of the expert class, so that the expert class doesn't turn on their masters. And what it is, you see, I was about to do the double copula. I always do that. What it is, in my opinion, I'm going to have to do it. I can't get out of it. What it is a collection of safeties so that you don't use the tools of data, let's say, on your masters and attempt to convict them.
Give an example.
For example, let's imagine that you have a high number of deaths around a vaccine or injuries. That could lead to questions about under what legal regime the vaccine manufacturers achieved immunity. And so you say, oh, no, that's just correlation does not imply causation. Of course, there are going to be runs in poker. Of course, there are going to be clusters of data. This is what being fooled by randomness is all about. So if you think about what those things, how they function inside of your mind, they tend to keep you from seeking remedies. You're not going to put somebody in jail if you believe all these things. You're not going to go poking into the intelligence community. If a conspiracy theorist makes you think about a lunatic, you're not a lunatic. You're a grown-up. It's first-order sophistication. Do you ever see a film called Victor Victoria?
No.
Victor Victoria is I think the tagline on the poster was the story of a woman playing a man playing a woman. And so it was a female impersonator who was actually Julie Andrews.
Right.
Now, if you saw Victor behind Victoria, you certainly saw one level deep. That's one level of counterintuition. And most people, when they get to one level of counterintuition, stop, pat themselves on the back, and at least they're not like the poor fools who only see Victoria, because Victoria, is the female being impersonated. But what happens if you see Sally? And let's imagine Sally is the person playing Victor, playing Victoria. Now you've got a problem, which is you say, that's a woman. So everybody who sees Victor says, you poor bastard, you are fooled. And Reddit is great for this, by the way. The average Reddit post is, I see through that thing that you're taken in by, but have fun with it. It's a superiority contest at first order counterintuition. So at first order counterintuition, conspiracy theorists are losers in their mother's basements who posit a new world order where the flat earth society of lizard people controls the cosmos. And the funny part about it is the Atlantic Council exists.
What's that?
Well, that would be Sally playing Victor, playing Victoria. I mean, in other words, of course, there are conspiracies everywhere. We found a million conspiracies. I could tell you, various operations, Operation Condor, Operation Sea Spray, where we sprayed bacteria on all of San Francisco. We all know about the Tuskegee medical experiment, Operation Northwoods, Operation Mockingbird, Operation Ajax in Chile. We know that conspiracies are the lifeblood of the world. Every trade group is a conspiracy. The Twitter files are about conspiracy. So we're living in a world. Hopefully you've achieved a point in your life where you've been invited to many conspiracies. And if you haven't, I'm really sorry, but they're everywhere. Now, what is a conspiracy theorist? It's somebody trying to figure out what these things are from outside. That's what you've got to stop. And how do you do this? Well, there are a lot of bad conspiracy theorists. There are a lot of losers and a lot of morons and a lot of idiots who imagine that lizard people are controlling everything. And so you try to make it look like the people who, well, let me give you an example. The moon landing and the JFK assassination are not in the same category. It's quite probable that something funny is going on around the JFK assassination, and it's highly improbable that the moon landings are fake. You know, TWA Flight 800 seems very strange, or what is like 300 missing man pads from the Afghan theater. A bunch of people saw something streaking up to a plane, and the explanation doesn't exactly add up. Now you have a problem. Like, let's, you know, the famous one that I like, which is just so dangerous. It's funny. You can just watch the radioactivity. If you can agree that nothing like Building 7's collapse has ever happened in structural engineering, you can say, well, that is interesting. It's just interesting that no building has ever collapsed like that. No steel building of this height, you know, from flame, whatever. And the instant you say that, some member of a group of 10 friends will say, oh yeah, I bet it was a bunch of thermite placed by Israelis, right, Einstein? And you're thinking, wow, gosh, that seems like a really high penalty to pay for just noticing no building has ever collapsed like that. I'm not saying I don't believe that.
So it's this kind of pattern match of any type of skepticism with a slippery slope down to the most extreme conspiracy.
And yeah, you're just in error. You took first order counterintuition so that you became superior to the Flat Earth Society, but you're not the guy who's going to figure out the Iran-Contra scandal. Because if I told you the Iran-Contra scandal, it doesn't matter how many documents you look at, you'll still never believe that that was true. It's so insane.
This retconning, this mass lighting, gaslighting at global scale, it is mind-blowing to me that this is done on the internet when everything is held together.
Why?
Because the entire internet is obsessed with pointing out hypocrisy.
No. It's not the entire internet.
A large portion, a very vocal...
A large portion of very small accounts, a large portion of right-of-center accounts. Almost no one in what I considered my world does anything remotely like this. In other words, if you walk into a physics department, good luck finding a Republican. And good luck finding anybody who will believe almost anything that you tell them or will do so publicly. I took a tour through the East Coast, the corridor of great universities, from Massachusetts down to Philadelphia. And, you know, I have many friends and colleagues in these departments, and they'd take me into their offices and they'd all close the door and they'd say, you have no idea how bad it is in here. And these are mathematicians and physicists. And they are living in a world in which it is simply too dangerous.